Welcome back. So, now we're going to be exploring the crucial stages that form the backbone of any successful negotiation process. Now, to begin with, I'd really like to ask you to follow them to the T if you're just starting out on your negotiation learning journey. However, you will be able to adapt them to your suiting in the future, and I'll be showing you how you can enlarge the scope of some of these stages later on in the course. But let's have a look at the first one, which is planning and preparation. I also like to refer to this as setting the foundation. Now, negotiation success begins well before you sit down at the table. Thorough planning and preparation are critical components that set the stage for any productive discussion. The more time that you spend planning and preparing, the more confident you will feel, and obviously the better results you're going to get when you're sitting down at the negotiation table. The second is defining your objectives. By clearly outlining what you hope to achieve from the negotiation, not to your counterpart but to yourself, you'll be able to understand your own priorities and the potential concessions that you're willing to make. Now, I like to refer to these concessions as tradables, and I'll be talking to you in more detail about that later on in the course. But in short, a tradable is something that you can either give or give away without it hurting your ultimate goal. Now, the third is gathering information. So this is usually the time and painstaking part of any negotiation process, where you're conducting research to understand the other party's interests, needs, constraints, and preferences. This information can be gathered in multiple ways: research on the internet, speaking to people, maybe even contacting your counterpart or competitors of the counterpart. But this knowledge will empower you to tailor your approach and arguments effectively. Now, the next one is assessing the BATNA. So I'm actually going to be talking to you about BATNA, WATNA, and ZOPA in the upcoming slides. BATNA is your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. If you like to think of it another way, it's your backup plan in case the negotiation fails. So knowing your BATNA strengthens your position and helps you to evaluate potential outcomes. But of course, it's not just your BATNA that is good to know, it's also your counterparts, which is a little bit more difficult to establish. But we'll talk about these in more detail and how they actually affect the deal in the coming slides. The next one is exchanging information and building common ground. All effective communication is the cornerstone of a successful negotiation, but this stage is mainly about establishing a shared understanding and exploring the interests of both parties. Done through communication, done through talking, and this is why it's really good to establish a nice rapport with your counterpart so that you're both more forthcoming with the information to each other, so that you know in the back of your mind you are helping the other person, but that's the point of the negotiation. You want, ideally, a win-win solution, and talking is the best way to do it. Next, we have active listening. Listening is very different to hearing. Hearing is something that we do subconsciously and without any effort. Listening takes more practice, it takes more focus, and also it's not just about absorbing the information that's coming in, it's giving feedback as well, paying close attention to what the other party is saying, listening not only to their words but also their tone, body language, and underlying needs. Also, questioning. Maybe you perceive an underlying need, however, in reality, that might not be the need or the requirement that your counterpart was trying to show. Sharing your perspectives. When you do share your perspective, clearly articulate your interests, objectives, and constraints. Most importantly, leaving emotion by the wayside. Open communication fosters that sense of transparency and trust, which will aid the negotiation process throughout. Next, we have problem solving, finding the win-win solution. So, as I've mentioned before, negotiation is not about having winners and losers. It's about finding mutually beneficial outcomes. The problem-solving stage involves brainstorming solutions that cater to both parties' needs. Now, you could do this on your own, you could do this in your teams before the negotiation, or maybe even with your counterpart, which would be ideal too, if you've built that rapport. So the problem-solving stage can save you massive amount of time and also repeat negotiations later on further down the process. Now, from your problem-solving, you're obviously going to generate options. I encourage creativity, and you should too, in finding alternative solutions if there is ever a barrier that appears due to an issue or a constraint, whether it be money or time or resources. By having this collaborative approach, it can lead to options that might not have been initially apparent. And this is what I'm referring to when I mentioned earlier about enlarging the pie so that everyone can have a larger piece of it. Once the options have been generated, it's time to evaluate the solutions. So assess the proposed solutions against your objectives and the other party's interests. Aim for solutions that provide value to both sides, and make sure you get agreement as well from the other side. Make sure they look happy, they sound happy, and also that the words that they're using are in agreement and they're looking to push forward. Clarifying and confirming. I like to refer to this also as solidifying the agreement. So once potential solutions are identified, it's also crucial to ensure that all parties have a shared understanding of the terms. Make sure there's no misunderstandings. Make sure there's no grey areas, because otherwise you'll carry on the process and then later on maybe the counterpart says, oh, hang on, that's not what I thought we meant when we were discussing, and you'll have to go back again to revisit it. Just to double check, summarize the agreements. So clearly state the agreed upon terms, emphasizing key points, and by doing this it will help you to prevent misunderstandings and confirms that both parties are on the same page. So I know it's re-clarifying. It might take a few more minutes depending on the amount of points, but you'll always find something. You'll improve things. So this stage is crucial to make sure that everyone is on the same page. If there are any issues that maybe you've put in the parking lot or put a pin in that one, often people say, address these unresolved issues here. If there are any concerns or ambiguities remaining, address them promptly to avoid any future dispute. So by this point, everything should be looking good. It's the executing stage, implementing the agreement. Closing the deal is not the end though. It's the beginning of fulfilling the agreed upon terms. So make sure that any terms or anything that's agreed or discussed within the negotiation is followed up. And this is more from a psychology point of view, because if you don't follow up in even one point that was discussed that you said you would, you're losing credibility with your counterpart, which will affect your rapport, which again could have a destructive influence on your negotiation. So make sure the execution and follow through is very punctual and precise. A great way to ensure that the documentation and follow through does happen is to put the agreement in writing, including all details and specifics. A well-drafted contract minimizes the risk of misinterpretation later on. Now, this doesn't have to be the final contract. It could be a draft contract for both counterparties' perusal. But have something in writing so that you have a reference point to go back to if there's any ambiguity later on. Also ensure that both parties uphold their end of the bargain. Regular communication and monitoring may be necessary to track progress, so also discuss when you're going to have updates, when you're going to debrief or synergize. Set those dates, set those times so that it's very clear when you'll be meeting and discussing eventualities again. So in conclusion, negotiation is a dynamic process that requires careful planning, effective communication, and creative problem solving. Also a commitment to fulfilling the agreements that have been discussed. By mastering these main stages, planning and preparation, exchanging information, problem solving, clarifying, confirming, and executing, you'll be better equipped to navigate negotiations successfully, whether in professional or personal spheres. Remember also, negotiation is not just about achieving your goals, it's about building relationships and fostering cooperation for the long term. I'll see you in the next slide.